Number 15. Night of the Drunken Santa Zombie. A 9-year-old boy is doing the dishes one night in Minneapolis, Minnesota, when he hears the back door open. It must be his parents returning home, he reasons. He turns around to say hello, but finds a zombie dressed like a Santa staring back at him instead. The horrifying sight sends him screaming out of the kitchen and racing down the road, calling for help at the top of his lungs. His frightened 16-year-old sister is left alone to fend for herself. As soon as she hears the commotion, she locks herself in the bathroom and calls her parents from a cell phone. She listens closely as a stranger's heavy footsteps echo throughout the house. Only when police officers arrive does she dare peek through the door to get the full story. State troopers find 21-year-old Brock Quinn Johnson still at the scene. The drunk college student is passed out on the floor in a pool of his own vomit. Apparently, he had signed up for a zombie pub crawl and had been drinking for the past 5 hours before wandering into a random home to pass out. Since being an undead Santa is not a crime, he was charged only with simple trespassing. Now, for a personal question before we move on to number 14. Have you ever been scared before by a creepy person dressed as Santa Claus? I'd love to know all the juicy details, and if not, perhaps you were afraid of Santa when you were younger? I mean, that white beard is terrifying. It's a proven fact that generosity makes you a happier person, so if you're generous enough to like this video, then thank you so much because it really helps us out. Also make sure to check out the description for a link to my channel, Sir Aim, where you can find other horror stories. Now, on to number 14. Number 14. Stabby Claus. Brian Delorme got on a bus at 1 in the morning in Lakewood, Colorado. It was Christmas Eve and he was dressed as, you guessed it, Saint Nicholas. Though a Jack the Ripper costume would have been more appropriate, as you'll soon find. For whatever reason, Brian and another passenger started mouthing off with one another. The fight intensified as the two approached the city of Denver, and at this point Brian became seriously upset. It isn't exactly clear who started the conflict, or even if the two knew each other before they got on the bus, but it is certainly clear who ended it. Brian went into a seething rage and pulled a knife from under his baggy red suit. Imagine being on the bus yourself and seeing jolly old Santa Nick himself repeatedly stab another young passenger in the stomach as hard and as fast as he can while screaming obscenities. The bus driver pulled over and called for help as Santa fled on foot, still clutching the bloody knife in his white gloves as he ran. Unlike most of these stories so far, police were eventually able to track down Brian a short while later and charge him for his crimes. He was later sentenced to 8 full years in prison for attempted murder. Perhaps next time he should just call a cab. Number 13. Santa versus the Kernel. This Santa is not looking for milk and cookies as he smashes his way into a KFC restaurant in Derbyshire, England. He opens the windows and climbs into the drive-thru armed with a sack and a large knife. The restaurant is closed and it appears as though no one else is inside, so he decides to go further in. A scared worker is cowering in the office when the intruder forces open the door and threatens them with his black blade. He orders them to open the safe and he stands over them while they fill a garbage can full of money. He then takes the employee out of the office, makes them empty the registers before disappearing from sight. This happened about 1 year ago, and the police have been unable to catch the person responsible. Somewhere out there, a psycho Santa is still on the loose. Number 12. Santa makes a withdrawal. San Francisco is the birthplace of SantaCon, which, if you haven't already guessed, is where large crowds of people dress up like Santa and stand around doing Santa-like things, I suppose. For whatever reason, the event has gained immense popularity and has since spread all across the world over the past 22 years. In recent years, however, one man decided to use the convention as cover to commit a Christmas catastrophe. In 2014, a man wearing a baggy red suit and a bad beard stands in line with a suspicious half-smirk. When his turn arrives, he slips the teller a note that says he has a gun and that they shouldn't do anything naughty this year if they want to survive. The teller does as they are told and hands him a wad of cash. The thief quickly makes a retreat with his stolen Christmas bonus. Getting away from the crime scene isn't very difficult at all. Once outside, he simply finds the largest group of red-suited fatzos and disappears into the center of them. Police have not been able to find him since, but they have released 2 images to the public. They suspect that he could very well have spent the rest of the day drinking with other Kris Kringles on a SantaCon pub crawl. Number 11. Arctic Ocean's 11. As you've probably already determined by now, people seem to love to rob places while dressed as Santa. However, very few of them seriously get into the role while doing so. This Santa's enthusiasm alone is enough to get him a decent spot on this week's Top 15s list. A man dressed as Santa enters the SunTrust Bank in Nashville, Tennessee one morning for one of the most jovial robberies in American history. Wearing a pair of black shades, the fat man walks up to the counter with a classic red sack and takes out a pistol. He tells everyone to be calm and merry. Apparently, bank heists always put this Santa in a very good mood. The thief was quite pleased as he loaded up his sack with stolen money, and eyewitnesses were more than a little disturbed at how well he was playing his part. He assured them that the only reason he was robbing the bank was because he needed to pay all of his elves. Another witness couldn't help but notice how complete the outfit was, right down to the oversized shoes. Of course, he couldn't leave without giving them a friendly warning to behave. If they left dye bombs on the money, he promised to come back and kill everyone. Okay, maybe that part wasn't very Santa-like, but other than that, he was fairly convincing. After he completed the robbery, Santa got away in a silver sedan. It may not have been as effective as a getaway sleigh, but it still did the trick. This happened all the way back in 2009, yet police have not been able to apprehend him. I think I'm beginning to notice a trend here. Listen, if you want to get away with robbery, you seem to stand a better chance if you dress up as, you-know-who. Number 10. Santa's New Sleigh. A Brazilian man dressed like Santa rented a Robinson Model 44 helicopter to fly him into the city of Sao Paulo. When the pilot casually asked him what his plans were, the Santa said only that he wanted to carry out a Black Friday surprise. The pilot probably assumed that it had something to do with delivering gifts to children, but this year, Santa actually wanted a present of his own. The man quickly hijacked the helicopter in mid-flight and forced the pilot to land in a remote clearing that had been picked out well in advance. Waiting for them to land was one of Santa's not-so-little helpers. He and Santa smacked around the poor pilot for a bit and then strung him up inside of a small barn. You already know how well Santa can tie up a present, so you can only imagine how tightly bound the pilot was. It took him hours to free himself and find help, and by then, the two had already stolen the chopper and were long gone. Try as they may, Brazilian authorities have not been able to find the stolen helicopter. They really have no idea where to start. Maybe they should start looking for it on the North Pole? Either way, if you hear whirling blades on your roof instead of reindeer hooves, don't be alarmed. Santa just needed to upgrade his sleigh this year. Luke, do you want to get your presents on time or not? Number 9. Christmas is cancelled. Santa Claus may be good at giving gifts, but giving him any other responsibilities and he just gets completely drunk off power. Just ask Ronald Joseph Papalioni, the 70-year-old Santa impersonator who ruined Christmas for everyone in Atlanta, Georgia. This fake Santa weaseled his way to the top of a state government agency called the Lake Allatoona Authority Preservation Center. Once he had gained access to their treasury, he began to pilfer as much money as possible. From 2007 to 2009, Ronald cut himself a series of falsified checks. For example, he ran an organization for underprivileged children called the Joy Foundation, and he figured that siphoning an extra $5,000 wouldn't hurt. This transaction was only the tip of the Christmas iceberg, so to speak. By the time he was caught, authorities suspected him of stealing more than $150,000. He was sentenced to 15 years of probation and ordered to pay a large portion of the money back. In the meanwhile, however, the children who benefited from the Joy Foundation faced hard times. Aside from not receiving the support they so desperately needed, they also learned that the man who had been dressing up as Santa Claus year after year was nothing more than a big, red phony. Number 8. Santa hates children. A mall in Maine was plagued by one of the meanest Santas known to man. Instead of sitting in a nicely decorated set, this legendary grump sat hunched over on a regular bench next to a depressing potted plant. He also had a lot of strange rules that were so obnoxiously rude, they ended up making him famous. First of all, if you wanted to climb into this Santa's lap, then you had to grease the wheels a bit by paying for an expensive photo. He wouldn't let you use your own camera, of course. No, you had to pay $20 for a professional shot. If you couldn't pay, then he put his hands over his lap and shut his legs. This Saint Nick simply had no time for poor families. Second, there was to be no smiling whatsoever. Santa never asked if the child was good or bad, or even what they wanted. There was no laughter, no mirth, nothing. If you wanted Christmas cheer from this Santa, then you'd have to spread it yourself. Now, if your child was brave enough to look directly into Santa's cold, lifeless eyes and tell him what they wanted, he would purposefully give a mean-hearted response. When one girl said that she wanted an American Girl doll, he replied that she was going to get an American football instead. Afterwards, it was very hard for her family to convince her that Santa cared enough to get her the right gift. When one angry mother posted her experience on Facebook, she found a chorus of offended families who had likewise experienced the worst mall Santa that Maine had to offer. He was quickly fired, and the mall gave out an official apology. There was also no policy on paying $20 for a photo, so he may have been pocketing the money for himself. Number 7. Sicko Claus. It was 2004, and Zay Harold Jones was ready to once again spread Christmas cheer to the children in Forest City, North Carolina. For the past 5 years, the 73-year-old retired contractor had always taken a 2-hour car ride into Greensboro to play Santa. When he offered to bring along an 11-year-old neighborhood girl to play as his elf assistant, her parents saw nothing wrong with his friendly invitation and readily agreed. After all, he was a trusted community figure, so they figured that nothing would go wrong. The pair left at 6 in the morning for a day of fun seasonal festivities, but they didn't get very far before Zay revealed his true intentions. The perverted old man reached over and touched the young girl in a very inappropriate manner. She didn't know what to do, so she just sat there in shock as the gross codger groped her endlessly. After a while, she asked him to stop and let her use the bathroom, so he drove her to a rest stop that was just off the highway and went inside. She frantically knocked on the stall door of a stranger and asked to use her phone. Together, they called the police and waited for an officer to arrive. Soon, Zay grew impatient and came inside of the bathroom to see what was wrong. Thinking fast, the woman told him that the girl was sick and needed to see a doctor. The two rushed past him and found an employee, who took them into his office and locked the door. Zay stood outside in a full Santa suit, innocently asking what was wrong, until the police arrived. For his crimes, Zay was sentenced to 12 weekends in jail, and had to register as a sex offender with the Forest City Police Department. Meanwhile, the young girl's mother said that her child hasn't been coping very well with what had been done to her. She has since acquired a strange hobby of drawing violent pictures of Santa being hanged and stabbed. Number 6. Sicko Claus. It's 7:30 in the morning, and local homeless man Anthony Russo was riding up and down the streets of Parma, Ohio, on his favorite unicycle. Dressed as Santa, of course. This delusional fellow sleeps on top of buildings and often hears the voice of his dead father, but that's beside the point. On this day, he sees a 12-year-old girl walking all by herself and gets a disgusting idea. He smoothly rides up to her and tries to lure her with a sack full of candy. The girl wisely ignores his advances, but this demented Santa is not one to take no for an answer. He grabs her arm. She breaks free and starts to walk faster. There's nobody nearby and the poor thing is very frightened indeed. Eventually, she hurries into a convenience store for help, the grubby Santa pedaling close behind. She tells the employees what he has been doing and he takes off, but not for long. It isn't hard for police to find a creepy-looking man dressed as Santa on a unicycle a short while later. Anthony is extremely agitated upon his arrest, and his mood only worsens after they cart him off to jail. He becomes suicidal and is placed on a special watch. When his family visits him, he has just one thing to say: "I'm going to watch my blood flow." Number 5. Pedo Claus. For 20 years, Jeffrey Moffat had been volunteering to play Santa Claus for the Santa Express Railroad in Missouri, but thankfully those days are now over. The disgusting 57-year-old man had since been convicted of raping a helpless 7-year-old girl while he was supposed to be babysitting her. After a few stays over at his house, the young girl told her grandmother that Santa had first squirted lotion onto his stomach and his private parts, and then told her to help him rub it in. After that, he made her get on top of him. She was immediately taken to the hospital to be examined for signs of abuse. Jeffrey's girlfriend is the president of the Polar Express, and she couldn't imagine her boyfriend ever doing this to a young child. Police, however, saw a clear connection. According to detectives, Jeffrey denied doing anything wrong at first, but then at the end of an interrogation, he added that children don't lie. They charged Jeffrey with multiple accounts of sex crimes ranging from child molestation to sodomy. In August of 2016, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison for repeatedly violating her. He will very likely die in custody, but sadly, this is not enough to replace the innocence of the girl he so viciously defiled. Number 4. The Sante Theory. On Christmas Day of 1996, the body of 6-year-old John Bennett Ramsey was found murdered in the basement of her home in Boulder, Colorado. The child beauty queen had been beaten and strangled by an unknown intruder who police have never been able to identify. While her father is often named as the primary suspect, there's another theory that it was none other than Santa himself. Bill McReynolds was a close friend of the family at the time. Coincidentally, he had visited the Ramsey residence dressed as Santa only days before the murder. He apparently slipped the little girl a suspicious note with a strange message: "You will receive a special gift after Christmas." Could this special gift have been a reference to her future murder? His wife, Janet McReynolds, was also interviewed by the police. Back in the 70s, she had written a curious play where a little girl was murdered in the basement, just like John Bennett. Oddly enough, the day of John Bennett's death was also the 22nd anniversary of the disappearance of their own daughter. They have since been officially cleared of any suspicion, but the strange letter has never been explained. Number 3. Walking Tall. On December 10th, 2004, Elkin Clark and Michael Tolles were two Santas who were selling Hershey's chocolate bars in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. The pair were hard at work when suddenly a woman named Annie Ruth Nelson interrupted their street hustle, at least according to Elkin's story. Apparently, the 74-year-old woman tried to take some of the chocolates, and that's when one of the Santas viciously attacked. When Elkin suspected that Annie had stolen 29 boxes of candy from him at an estimated value of $145, he came at her swinging a 2x4 and caught her in the jaw. According to witnesses, Elkin hit the woman at least 2 more times while she was already lying on the ground, bleeding and unconscious. He then assaulted a different woman who was only trying to stop the violence. Poor Annie was unresponsive as paramedics rushed her to the hospital. X-rays showed that her jaw had been severely fractured and the front of her skull was bashed in as well. Her teeth were wired shut and a feeding tube was pushed down into her stomach. She was then taken to a nursing facility to recover. Unfortunately, she had difficulty breathing from her wired jaw, so doctors opened up a hole in her throat to let her breathe that way instead. The blunt force trauma was simply too much for her frail bones, and she passed away a short while later. Elkin was convicted of murder and was given a lengthy sentence. Worst of all, police could find no evidence that anything had been stolen in the first place, which means that this attack was most likely completely unprovoked. Number 2. Silent Night. A family of 6 were happily unwrapping their presents in Grapevine, Texas, when a man dressed as Santa showed up packing 2 automatic pistols. He wasted no time murdering all of them in their living room, right underneath the Christmas tree. What they may or may not have realized moments before their death was that this man was none other than their very own father. Aziz Jazdan Pana was 56 years old and going through a bitter separation with his wife, Fatima Ramati, when he decided to make the fatal decision to kill them all. They were living in different apartments and were going through a bankruptcy proceeding at the time. Now, 6 dying faces stared back at him. Among the bleeding bodies were those of his son, his daughter, and his wife, but also his young niece, brother-in-law, and sister-in-law. What exactly passed through his mind at this point is impossible to say for sure. Aziz could have still been overwhelmed with anger, or perhaps he was already deeply regretting what he had just done.
Hello, Grapevine 911. You need help? Are you sick?
Either way, he put the gun to his temple and joined them. One of his unfortunate family members regained consciousness for long enough to call 911, but they weakly hung up soon after. Who knows how long they had to endure seeing their entire family dead before they, too, finally succumbed to their injuries. Police and firefighters rushed to the residence to investigate the hang-up call, and they were horrified by the brutal Christmas scene before them. Number 1. The Santa slaying. Bruce Pardo rang the doorbell to his ex-wife's home in Covina, California, and patiently waited for the door to open. It was late at night, and inside he could hear their Christmas party in full swing. When a little 8-year-old girl answered the door, she was surprised and delighted to see Santa standing before her, holding a large present. He quickly dropped the gift and shot her point blank in the face. With 2 pistols, the deranged Santa stepped over her fallen body and went further into the 2-story house. There were 25 surprised guests scattered about, and he methodically hunted them down as they leapt from room to room. Some tried to barricade themselves behind furniture, others ran upstairs, while some managed to jump out of the windows to freedom. One woman broke her ankle after jumping from high above, and a 16-year-old girl was shot in the back before she had a chance to do the same. A teenage boy ran fleeing from the house while screaming, "They shot my family!" as he went down the street. By the time the shooting spree was over, 9 people were killed. Having successfully taken as many innocent lives as possible, Bruce doused the entire house in a flammable liquid and set it ablaze. He drove to his brother's house and sat in his car to consider what to do next. The original plan had been to escape to Canada, but he had severely burned his arm in the process, so he decided to kill himself instead of going to the hospital and getting caught. A single bullet to the head ended his Christmas massacre, once and for all. Now you would hope that the tragedy ends here, but Bruce had one final nasty surprise in store. He had rigged the car with explosives. The detonation rocked the entire neighborhood. When police found his blown-out wreckage, they learned that he had made a bomb using 2 gas tanks. Apparently, a recent divorce settlement was what sent him over the edge. Instead of paying back the $10,000 that he owed his ex-wife, he decided to destroy his entire family on Christmas Eve instead. Hey ho, Merry Christmas. Oh man, that was pretty depressing, wasn't it? We still have a little bonus for you after I do my bit. I would really appreciate it if you were to pop over to my channel and subscribe. I post horror stories. Not the true kind, but the fake kind, but the good ones. Like, I hunt for these, I look for these. Also, please don't forget to tell us if you were actually ever scared by a Santa or if you have a fear of Santa. I would really love to know. Also, don't forget to leave a like, I would really appreciate that as well, and without further ado, let's get into the bonus. The Easter Bunny throws down. Allow me to cheer you up by showing some footage of the Easter Bunny ready to kick some tail. The fight you're watching occurred where else but New Jersey. Only in such a beloved state like Jersey can you see a scrappy Easter Bunny rip off his head and charge somebody. He was supposed to be taking pictures with children, but he decided to take and break and trade some right hooks instead. The scuffle occurred after a 1-year-old child fell out of the Easter Bunny's lap and hit the floor. The father immediately blamed the Easter Bunny, who, as you can see, just wasn't having it today. When security guards finally seem to have gained control over the situation, the Easter Bunny comes flying in for a second round. He rips his fluffy white gloves off and pushes a female out of the way so that he can take another swing. The fight stops only when he is pinned to the ground by security, all while still wearing the costume's furry lower half. Both the Easter Bunny and the father have since been charged with aggravated assault and disorderly conduct. If you ask me, it looks like the Easter Bunny was about to lose, but really, there are no winners in this fight. Especially when your child now has traumatic memories of you fighting with classic holiday icons.